Hello, my name is Karen Ainsley, and I'm a public library consultant at the Indiana State Library. I'm here to talk to the library board about budget planning. Do you find budget planning, budgeting, and forecasting a challenge? There's stress associated with these activities, enough to wear down your resolve. I hope my presentation helps you keep your cool in the efforts you make to understand budgeting and its importance to create something of value, the library service to the community. There are a number of learning objectives for this presentation. I begin with a budget definition and an associated story for your library, then knowing where the money comes from and how it is spent. This requires you to analyze data when preparing the budget, and library has the flexibility of several funds in appropriating for expenditures, such as operating, LERF, and rainy day fund, and in some cases, a debt fund. When planning for debt, you need to hire expertise of a financial advisor and a bond counsel. Plus, the board plays the important role of communicating the plan to the stakeholders, taxpayers, and appointing authorities. Your organization has a shared vision of what is important. The staff should participate and be accountable to that vision. Keep your people motivated and engaged, and make sure they understand the numbers as they relate to service goals. Know the story, the staffing, the collection, facility, and technology resources delivered to the community. Share the story with stakeholders, governing bodies, and taxpayers. Funding follows a timeline. An effective strategic plan translates your library strategy into a simple story about the organization's future. You know that story is clear when people around you understand what leadership has chosen to do and not to do. This clarity is the foundation for planning, budgeting, and forecasting that works. So what is it going to cost for library services? And what are the services? It's important to have a long-range plan that covers 3 to 5 years. It includes a breakdown into timeline of goals for each year. What is the mission and goals? What programs and services do you need to add or expand to achieve those goals? And what ones are no longer needed? And what we're talking about here are the resources for staffing, collection, facility, and technology that require funding. There is a process that continues throughout the budget year, and that is to monitor the budget, know how the library service is faring and the current budget. In economic hard times, revenues may fall short of forecasts. Is it a sufficient budget to fulfill the library plan? And are the public library board and director good stewards of the taxpayer money? Most of the money comes from property tax. The money comes in from the tax levy associated with the budget. The money is received twice a year. You don't necessarily get all the money you expect. There can be shortfalls. In addition, there are monthly tax distributions associated with income tax. Finally, there's the locally generated income. These are the library's revenues. The gateway requires a Form 2 to be completed on miscellaneous revenues. The flip side of tax revenues is money being spent. Money is expended on staffing, collection, programming, technology, and facilities. Some expenditures are fixed and others are variable. Understand how the money is spent and what value it is generating. I list some of these expenditures here. Understanding the expenditures assists you with the budget plan. When you need to make decisions within the context of this fuzzy future, the most effective approach may be to use predictive models. What do you know in order to estimate the budget? You know how much you took in as income and how much you have spent and what remains. The budget estimate is submitted on Form 1 through the gateway. Look at past expenditures as talked about earlier in monitoring. Track appropriations and expenditures in budget categories. These are the 4 expense categories listed here. Consult the treasurer's reports or library financial statements for the final quarter. Is the budget on target, short, or is it more than sufficient? Can categories be apportioned differently, or are increases or decreases required? The library standards and the certification rules need to be reviewed, and you have the link here on this slide. You just click on the link to get to the certification rule or the standards. Here are some of the standard items that impact the budget. Be sure to monitor funds spent from the operating funds for collection development. 8% is the minimum to expend for collection development, and that includes books, audiovisual materials, electronic media devices, and databases. Electronic media devices means devices used by the public to directly access information, excluding peripherals and connectivity. The statewide delivery service, there is a minimum of 1 day per week of service for each 2,000 packages shipped or received per year based on the previous year's total volume. And your director is paid for hours the library is open, and if that's fewer than 35 hours, or at least 35 hours if you're open longer. And remember, all federal laws must be obeyed, including FICA, Social Security, and Medicare, and you must meet the certification for the appropriate size of library, and your facility requirements need to be included in the long-range plan where you give an assessment of the facilities. The standards require that you serve the adult, young adult, and children in your community. Hours or the minimums are listed for Class C, B, and A libraries in that order. Hours are unique for systems, so branch and main library may stagger hours to provide for the minimum hours. Programs, a total program sponsored by the library should be 12 programs a year per system, regardless of the population served. A program is one event on one date. Library systems should offer children's reading program for a minimum of 6 weeks at each fixed location annually. And as I said, the staff serves the adults, young adults, and children. And at the Indiana State Library, we provide some technologies, such as a free website. The library shall provide public access computers and wireless access at an appropriate internet connection speed to meet the needs of the community. They must also be connected to a printer. There must be a staff computer with office software and connected to an internet and a printer. An integrated library system is required of all libraries. So you know the revenues and expenditures for your current year, and the hope is that the tax rate and levy fund the anticipated expenses. Rarely do you have more income than expenses. Monitoring expenses is important. Besides keeping an eye on income and expenses, library tracks what's remaining month to month and year to date. When preparing the budget or financial worksheet in the Gateway, the figure for the cash balance is listed from the June ledger. Is it enough to pay the library's way through the end of the year? Know the estimate and miscellaneous revenues, but how big can the budget grow in the coming year? Your budget does not remain the same year to year. The budget is allowed to grow a certain amount based on economic growth. The average growth quotient number comes from the Department of Labor and then is further analyzed by the State Budget Office, then announced by the Department of Local Government Finance in June. Just like costs are not static, the budget grows to accommodate costs of doing business. These figures show that the growth had been flat, but the increase year to year is about the same. Except for this year, we did grow a little bit more. Besides looking at the library needs for the budget, there are forces outside the library that impact the forecast of future costs. The website www.hoosierdata.in.gov can help with this. Are businesses growing in your district, or is unemployment a problem? Also, the library receives a 1782 notice from the Department of Local Government Finance. This shows numbers, for example, the maximum levy. Note whether the max levy is going up or down year to year. Also, property taxes caps have an impact, and the Department of Local Government Finance reports those numbers for the taxing units. All these numbers are indicative of the fiscal status of the library. I emphasize the monitoring of the budget with attention to monthly tracking of appropriations and expenditures in budget categories. Consult treasury reports or library financial statements for the final quarter. Is the budget on target, short, or is it more than sufficient? Can categories be apportioned differently, or are increases or decreases required? There are remedies for a budget that is not sufficient. If the money's not available in the operating, then library has to borrow, transfer, or do an additional appropriation with the required paperwork through the Department of Local Government Finance. I talked at length about expenditures. Here is an analysis of spending patterns in general. I also include a specific example for South Whitley Public Library in the pie chart that follows. Look at your library numbers over the past few years and determine needs. State Board of Accounts recommends you use a zero-based approach and recreate budget each year based on need, mindful of the growth quotient limit. What is known is that the personnel may go up due to health care costs. Personnel services is the one area of the budget that really should be completed by the library board, as they are the ones who determine salaries. As far as budget calendar, the first step is to prepare sample form 1 in July for the board with current and proposed figures. On the pie chart, the total outlay of 64% is for personal services. The capital outlays are 13%, and that includes expenditures for books. On the pie chart, the total outlay of 64% is for personal services. The capital outlays are 13%, and that includes expenditures for books. The Form 1 is a budget estimate. The estimate is associated with a line item budget. The line item process is detailed in the State Board of Accounts accounting manual. There's a line for each revenue or expenditure that are entered on separate lines. Sometimes this works against the notion of the story the library wants to tell. For instance, a single line such as travel may be vulnerable to attack. The position should be that a particular item supports the overall delivery of a particular service to the community, whether it's the collection, staffing, building, or technology. In addition to line item budgeting, the budget process is based on funds accounting. In general, I've been describing an operating fund, but there's more than one fund available to public libraries for budgeting. Multiple funds gives libraries the flexibility in meeting the costs of operation. The total budget is more than one fund. The funds listed here are required to be reported to the Department of Local Government Finance if the library plans to expend money in those funds in the budget year. Each require a submission through the gateway forms for the budget year. As the budget is prepared in the gateway, there is a line for the cash balance, the funds that remain for the final 6 months of the year. As budget planners work through the numbers, the budget estimate, there may be funds available that are not earmarked for expenditures. The library board needs a fund balance plan or policy where they move money into LIRF, the Library Improvement Reserve Fund, or to the Rainy Day Fund, and don't forget that you can invest. The fund balances finance capital improvements or help you through lean times. Careful planning anticipates these needs and when it's necessary to appropriate LIRF and rainy day funds to supplement the operating funds. Like the operating fund, gateway forms are completed to appropriate funds for expenditures during the year. This shows the resources to finance construction. It is often outside the operating funds in LIRF and in grants, and then there's also the options for loans or bonds. There is a constitutional limit on how much you can receive through a general obligation bond, and you need to hire experts such as a bond counsel and a financial advisor. This lists the library's obligations and the advantages of the general obligation bond. There is another option, and it's a lease corporation for when you exceed the constitutional debt limit. Here you form a not-for-profit corporation made up of community members. That building corporation is actually the issuer of the bonds. They issue the bonds. They take the bond proceeds to build or renovate the building. Then they lease that building back to the library over the term of repayment of the bonds. Those lease payments through your debt service levy are paid to the building corporation, who passes them on to the bondholders. Lease payments are going to match the amount of principal and interest due each year to the bond. There's a little bit of added cost to a trustee bank that might come into play, but it closely matches that for debt service. The next two slides cover the questions the library board and director need to answer about the project. Basically, you need to know the size and cost of the project and what the debt will be. Again, a bond counsel and a financial advisor can help answer these questions. What is the board's role in the planning process? The board's role is very important. They should be out in the community talking to people that you might not otherwise talk to, such as business owners, healthcare area, the ministers, all different people, the farmer. And they should be out there being the library's political eyes and ears. What's happening? How likely is it for people to support this? We all feel strongly about our projects, especially about libraries. Sometimes you need your board to figure out realistically what actually can be done. They should help you strategically plan those meetings with the people in your community. We call them centers of influence. So who in your community do you need to be meeting with, and maybe some board members go with you to those meetings. It shouldn't be the director out there alone. I want to talk briefly about managing the money. In addition to the budget planning, it is important that the library board is mindful to manage the money. So not only are finances monitored based on the approved budget, but the money is safeguarded. The takeaway for this presentation is that the budget tells the library's story of expenditures and services provided to the community. The library board, director, and staff share this story with the community, library patrons, taxpayers, and community decision makers. The library board and director are good stewards of the money to safeguard and expend for services to the community. The budget plan follows the budget calendar. The calendar is available from the Department of Local Government Finance. It specifies the important days on the 18-month budget calendar. Like I said, tax revenues are received in June and December, and monthly for income tax revenue, and it drives an 18-month budget plan. So your budget planning begins in earnest at the end of June and continues until the library board submits the approved budget in early November. That budget is for the following calendar year. The Department of Local Government Finance has links to training videos for the Gateway. And these are some additional resources to inform your budget planning and telling the library budget story. Here's the contact information for the Department of Local Government Finance, and also a link to the map where you can find your DLGF field representative. And my contact information is here, along with my supervisor's contact information.